I'm not going to cover every word. I will hit a few of them that are kind of outstanding. But I want to describe what the three categories that all these words fit in, okay? The first one is this. The first category is within oneself. In other words, some of these words describe what is going on the inside of the person that is in this condition, within oneself. That is, it's an inner problem. It's an inner problem. It's a problem that people have with themselves, within themselves. So where this starts is the main problem. He starts with, men will be lovers of self. God bless you. Have a good day. Let's go home. Okay? Lovers of self. Right? Most of the time, we find issues in our lives. There's a sin issue, there's a relationship issue. We can just take a look at the fact that we love ourselves a lot. We love ourselves a lot, and that results in certain things. This is the root of the problem. It's as if what Paul does, writing to Timothy here, says, I'm going to tell you what the root is, and then I'm going to give you examples of all the stuff that grows out of it. And everything else that comes in this list is rooted in the problem that self-love dominates these people. They are committed to themselves above everything else. They are committed to themselves above everything else. Everything else in the passage grows from this and has its source in this first descriptive phrase that people are lovers of self. It's kind of like the fruit of the Spirit is love, and then there's a lot more that comes after that, but it's singular. It's love, right? And then the package deal that comes along with the Spirit of God producing love in our lives is also joy and peace and long-suffering and gentleness and goodness and faith and meekness and temperance. And all these things come along with it, love being the highest of all the virtues, right? And it's like that, but on the evil side here. It's not love, it's love of self. And because there's love of self, all the other stuff in the package deal comes after it, okay? Lovers of self is what they are. That is, they're intent on their own interests at any cost. I wonder what would happen in our marriages if we stopped wanting our spouse to understand us and we started wanting to understand our spouse. The irony of it would be that both of us would get understood the way we want to be understood. But we would get there not because we're demanding that someone else understand us. We would get there because we're trying to understand the other person. And it's amazing how things change when the environment is marked by, I just want to know you well enough to bless you. I just want to know you well enough. What is it you're trying to say to me? We spend way more time trying to explain ourselves to the people around us than we do trying to understand what they're saying to us about them. And I'll go out on a limb and tell you that especially when things turn dysfunctional and things the relationship is in crisis, I guarantee you sit down in those environments and I don't think I have ever heard anyone in those situations that was talking from the perspective of, help me to understand you and your needs. It's almost always marked by, Why can't you understand what I'm trying to tell you? It's almost, well, imagine if the other person is living in that same place. Well, why can't you understand what I'm trying to tell you? Well, it's because two people are lovers of self, both committed to making the other person understand them. This issue of loving self is a profound and deeply consequential problem, and it demonstrates itself in many ways. The word means that they're committed to themselves above all else. Now, the word lovers is used 2 more times in this passage. They are lovers of self, and then it says they are lovers of money and they are lovers of pleasure. Lovers of money and lovers of pleasure. Well, you love yourself, that's just kind of what happens, right? I love myself, I become committed to hoarding, taking care of myself, and I'm committed to pleasing myself. What is it that's going to make me feel good? What is it that makes me feel better, right? We become lovers of pleasure. We become lovers of pleasure because we're lovers of self, right? The ideas of indulgence. We love money for self-gain. We love pleasure for self-indulgence. Notice that the problem is not money, nor is it pleasure. Both are real things in this world, and there's a place for both of them. The problem is falling in love with them so that you live for them, right? We are lovers of money, lovers of pleasure in this passage. That's the problem. Some of the other words that are present here indicate this. They have no self-control. Why do they have no self-control? Because self-control requires self-denial and self-restraint. Well, if you're in love with pleasure, restraint, you know. Hey, you know, without being ridiculous about this, and if a chocolate chip cookie is good, 2 are better, right? And if 2 are better, 3, right? I mean, hey, a plate full, the more the merrier, right? This is the way self-indulgence thinks and acts and speaks. They have no self-control because that would require self-denial, self-restraint. That's what's being described in this passage, rooted in self-love. Notice also, these are the problems on the inside of us, on the inside of these people. Lovers of money, lovers of pleasure. They are boastful, arrogant, conceited, and reckless. Now, 3 of those really go together, obviously. Boastful, arrogant, conceited, okay? The word reckless is an interesting one because what it means is this. Reckless means that there is no caution for consequences. That's what reckless means. No caution for consequences. The idea is, there are things that bring me pleasure. There are things I want. I am going to pursue them no matter how much they destroy me. No matter what the consequences are. Right? I'm completely heedless of the consequences. What I'm doing, what I'm pursuing is proving to be destructive for my life, and I will keep doing it because I am deeply committed to myself and I refuse to consider the consequences. It's recklessness. It's recklessness. Destruction's coming, but I'm not going to pay attention to that at all. I'm not going to listen to the warning signs. I'm not going to see them, hear them, pay attention to them. Why? Because I will not limit myself or change my course in any way. I want what I want, and that's where I'm going. It's reckless. Please note in this passage that love of self is the condition. This is important for us to notice. It is not only the condition of things within ourselves, but it is that condition within us that is destroying us even while we hold on to it. Please hear this. Self-love will destroy you. Promise. Self-love will destroy you. The problem with self-love, however, is that no matter how destructive it is, we still love ourselves. And so self-love becomes an incredibly vicious cycle of I love myself, so I want what I want, but it's destroying me, but I love myself, and I want what I want, but it's destroying me, but I love myself. This problem is, I mean, when you look at, well, we don't need to use examples. I think it's sufficient to say that the destructiveness of a life that is oriented toward a person doing nothing but pursuing their own interests, the destructiveness there is evident. And yet our love of ourselves drives us to keep doing this thing that is destroying us, to live in this place that is so destructive to us. The second category is toward others. We have a problem within ourselves. We have a problem, secondly, toward others. Self-love is the root of our relationship problems. People choose self at the expense of others and therefore cost themselves the joy of human relationships. I want what I want badly enough that even though living at war with you will make my life miserable and might even cost me my husband, my wife, my family, I'm going to do it because I love myself. I'm going to keep fighting. I'm going to stay in the fight. I'm going to win this one. Right? This self-love becomes something that divides people. Well, it's just obvious. You can't have two self-lovers living at peace in the same place at the same time. They will drive each other crazy because they will get in each other's way. They will get in each other's way. They will become an inconvenience to each other. Self-love is the root of all relationship problems. Secondly, in this passage, we start to see how this bears out in some of the descriptions that are given. It says that people will be disobedient to parents, unloving. That word unloving means literally without natural affection. In other words, you can't even love the people that would be natural for you to love even if you weren't a born-again Christian. Unbelievers think it's normal for parents to love children, children to love parents, and spouses to love each other. Everybody kind of understands that's the normal thing. That's what should be anyways. That's what we want for our lives, right? Everybody kind of gets that. The problem here is that self-love manifests itself in, no matter how destructive it is to the relationship, I'm not going to do anything my parents tell me to do. Forget that. I don't have natural family affection. Now, without natural affection would mean something more like this. I love other things more. I love them so much that I would pursue them even at the expense of the things that I know I really should love, that are most valuable in my life. No longer loving even natural family relationships. Listen to these words, because these all deal with the ways that people at this place and time are going to be relating toward others. They're irreconcilable. You know what the word irreconcilable means? I mean, you know what it means. It means you're at war with somebody, and someone wants to bring the two of you together again, wants to fix the thing so that you are in good standing with each other again. But one person is saying, or some cases maybe two people are saying, no, I refuse. I don't want to be reconciled. I will not make a change that allows this person and I to be in a right relationship with each other again. Irreconcilable. You can't fix them. You know, sometimes, and there's a truth to this. How many of you have heard of irreconcilable differences? Right? Well, that's the end of the relationship. Irreconcilable differences is just two people committed to themselves. I mean, that's the definition of lovers of self. There's irreconcilable differences. Now, let me just pause here. It may be that there are some times when the differences are actually so important that they are not reconcilable. That's possible. That's possible. There are some things that as Christians we cannot reconcile ourselves to. I recognize that. But the majority of issues between people are not issues of, my spouse is demanding that I join them in something sinful and I can't go that way. For the most part, it's just, I don't want. I don't want. Okay? It's irreconcilability. We will not be right. We will not find a way that we can agree on to move forward together. Irreconcilable. Malicious gossips, talking about others. Treacherous. Treacherous. The word treacherous, we think of someone who would betray us, someone who's a traitor. The word, and that's true, by the way. The word can refer to traitors, but it also means this. Treacherous means betrayers of the trust that is given to them. Someone trusts you, you betray their trust. You betray their trust. Well, you listen to that list. Disobedient to parents, unloving, that is without natural affection, irreconcilable, malicious gossips, and treacherous. How many would agree relationships are going to be a problem? They're going to be a problem. You can't take that list and turn that into a healthy family. You just can't do it, right? That's the description that is given in this passage of people toward others around them. All right, so the last one is this. The human condition is, thirdly, in this list, toward God. Toward God. There's that which was within us. There's that which describes our relationship with others. And then there's that which describes our relationship toward God. The first word to notice here is that within this list, people are described as being unholy. Unholy. That is, they're not separated unto God. They're not devoted to God. And therefore, they behave morally deficient. Their lives are marked by unholiness, by immorality, because they're not devoted to God. They're not separated unto the Lord their God. Okay? And so unholiness becomes a mark of life. The second thing that we're told about people in the way they view God is, the way they're related to God is, that they are not lovers of God because they love pleasure. Let me just pause here for a second. How many of you know that one of the problems with drugs is that the pleasure that it gives immediately eventually begins to wear off in its intensity, and it takes either more of or something different and stronger to produce the same effect that this back here used to produce? Right? And by the way, the same is true for exposing ourselves to immorality. You expose yourself to immorality, and over time, things that would normally be exciting no longer are exciting, and you have to go further and further into more and more strangeness in order to get the same exciting rush that you once did with things that were normal. This is a tendency of sin, that it produces the kind of dissatisfaction in us that constantly is driving us towards something more, something stronger, something different. How many of you have ever heard the word anhedonia? You ever heard the word anhedonia? It's the technical term for the human inability to experience pleasure. The inability to experience pleasure. There's a whole field of psychological study, and one of the main problems is this, that exposed to pleasure repeatedly often enough, certain forms of pleasure, other things lose their ability to be pleasurable to us. They lose the ability. Okay? So, listen, my intention is not to preach against, well, like now I'm hesitant to even use an example. But some things just present such intense pleasure that other stuff, such intense pleasure with seemingly no cost associated with it, that other things that you'd have to work at to get pleasure just don't seem pleasurable anymore, right? So I'm going to give an example. Don't run out and throw out all video games. I'm not saying that they're the root of all evil. But I'm just saying you can see how you can sit and be a bump on a log and receive pleasure, and if you do it for hours on end, eventually your ability to feel pleasure at other things that require effort is lessened. It kills your ability to feel proper pleasure in other areas. Okay? And what is described in this passage is people that have pursued pleasure for so long that they've lost the spiritual ability to feel pleasure with the things of God. They can no longer take pleasure in the things of God. They are lovers of pleasure more than lovers of God. Pursue pleasure. Pursue earthly pleasure. Pursue earthly pleasure. What it does is it deadens your senses, your ability to respond to the things of God. Right? That's what's described here. The third thing that is described here is that people are religious in form, but they are inwardly unchanged. They deny its power. Religious in form. In other words, they're still doing religious things. They're still going through religious motions, but they deny the power of religion. That is, they deny the thing that true faith is intended to produce in the life of a believer. They deny that. That's not taking place in their lives. All right. That's my three-part description of the words that are used here. Let me close with this, because there's two things very, very quickly that I think are, well, the first one I find stunning and somewhat disheartening. That's the description of the human condition. Why is this doing this? There we go. The second one is the human constituency. That is, who are the people we're talking about here? Who are the people we're talking about here? Who are these people? Who are these men? Men will be lovers of self. Who is this? Who is Paul warning Timothy about? Well, the answer is a little bit concerning. Because in this passage, the thing that Paul is dealing with is people that have a form of religion. In other words, it's not people that are completely irreligious outside of church circles. It's the people that are sitting next to us. It's church attenders. It's people that give the appearance of being religious. In other words, there's going to come a time when churches will have lots of people in them that are described by the list of words that we just went through. And that's not a happy thing to think about. That's a terrible thing to think about. Church attenders, self-identified Christians, professing Christians, not people out in the world. The people that are being described here are people that Timothy is expected to be having to interact with because they're within the scope of his ministry. People that he would have to minister to. In other words, the time will come when we find these characteristics potentially within our own fellowship or within the scope of people that claim to be followers of Christ. So, is it okay to say this? The days are difficult enough. I've said this from time to time to my children. One of the things that I will say sometimes, if I hear two children squabbling, I will say something to them like, Guys, if you want someone to be mean to you, there's lots of people out there that will be more than happy to be mean to you. If we start being mean to each other in our own house, we're in real trouble. Where do you go to find people that are like cheering for you and rooting for you, and they're just always on your side, right? Where are you going to find that? If you can't find it here, where are you going to find it, right? Where are you going to go? How many would agree that whatever out there means, when I go out there and I run into people that are not encouraging me, not helping me, people that put themselves in the position of an enemy toward me, that's kind of expected, but I really don't want to have to deal with it on the inside circles of my life. Within my home, within my church family. I don't want to deal with that there. Paul is warning, the word that we use for this is apostasy. Paul is warning that there will be a day in which the spiritual condition will be exposed to the point that we will see a preponderance of people existing within the confines of the church experience whose lives are demonstrating this, not the fruit of the Spirit. A great falling away, a turning away, an apostasy. That's what Paul is warning Timothy about here. Maybe we recognize some mild forms of these things in ourselves. Maybe we recognize the tendency to love self too much. Maybe we recognize some of these. Listen to what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that these people are true believers like this. I'm saying that the parable Jesus told, where the wheat and the tares grow up in the same field side by side, could be applied to these times and even to a particular church. Well, wow, there's wheat and tares together in the same place. That's the constituency. He's not talking about people far from the church. He's talking about people that we would rub shoulders with within the supposed church. So here's the last thing. How does Paul tell Timothy to respond to this? What's the response to this? Well, Timothy is told, avoid such men as these. Avoid such men as these. So, could I just pause here for a second and ask if I can get, I guess this is the day for polls. How many would be willing to join me in saying, I do not want to fellowship in a body that's marked by those characteristics? If I can avoid it, I don't want that. I don't want that. At the end of the day, if we don't want that, then we can't be that. And we have to ask God to give us the grace to not fall in love with ourselves so that we walk down this road of developing the characteristics that are described in this passage. We can't be this person. If I don't want to be there, then I can't be that. I have to ask God by His grace to give me the strength to be His man, His woman in this day, no matter what this day looks like. Here's the human response that Paul suggests to Timothy. This is how you should respond, Timothy. This is what your response should be as a man. He says, avoid such men as these. Avoid such men as these. All right, this means two things. I need to close with these two. It means two things. 5 minutes, we're done. It means two things. The first one is this. Don't forget that when Paul says avoid such men, he's speaking specifically to Timothy, giving him counsel as a minister. I've got to tell you that this is very difficult for me to hear. And it has an application for you, so don't think it's just about ministers. But the point of it is this. The point of what Timothy is being told by Paul is this. Don't waste your time and energy in ministry trying to deal with people that are lovers of self. They love pleasure more than God. They're reckless. They're disobedient. You need to know that you go down that road, you take a couple steps down that road, you discover that's who you're dealing with, that you have to be able to say, like, it's time to shake the dust off my feet and move on to someone else where the ministry will be effective. And I've just got to pause here and tell you that that is like the worst thing I can possibly think of. Like for me, who I am, everything about me wants to disobey that Bible verse right there. Everything about me wants to disobey it. I absolutely hate the idea of giving up. I hate the idea of saying, this person's not going to listen, so I quit. I just despise the idea of saying, I got to move on. And I've gotten burned by that a number of times. It is a really hard thing to come face to face with the fact that in this situation there are two possibilities. Either this person is not going to respond, or I'm not equipped to tell them something in a way that they're going to be able to respond to. But either way, there's an impasse here that you just got to walk away from. That is a terrible prospect to me. It's just a terrible prospect to me. He says you got to separate from them. You got to avoid them. You got to turn away from them. Timothy, as a minister, must not allow such people to drain his time and his energy. Now that sounds self-serving to me. You know, I just want, no, I'll keep trying, I'll keep praying, I'll go for it, you know. What Paul says to Timothy is avoid such men. He's talking about ministry. He's talking about you're just going to have to move on sometimes. The second thing is this. We need to understand that separation is not a physical quarantine. It's a spiritual quarantine. You're not going to be able to separate yourself from all these people. If you're living in a day where these people really are the preponderance of the population, and that's kind of the spirit of the day you're living in, you're not going to be able to avoid their physical presence. When Paul says avoid them, he's not talking about finding a place, look on your map in Pennsylvania, find the most remote spot you can be in, and go hide out there. What he's talking about is you cannot allow yourself to be influenced by these people. You cannot keep company in a way with them that you become like them. You must maintain spiritual separation. You have to avoid being tainted by this spirit. We're not to be like them. We're not to be influenced by them. We can't catch what they've got. There are worse diseases than COVID, and self-love is one of them. Don't let yourself be around people that are going to teach you to love yourself. Keep some distance. Avoid that. It's not a physical quarantine, it's a spiritual quarantine. Keep yourself spiritually guarded so that that spirit of that day does not rub off on you. All right. That's what the passage is dealing with. That's what the warning of the day is. It's not a happy prospect. I acknowledge that. It's not a happy prospect. But I will tell you this. We have a God who is able, by his Spirit, to keep us from falling. You see, the implication of Paul telling Timothy to avoid such men is this: you can. You don't have to be that. Oh, that might be the day you're living in. Don't participate. Don't be that. Why? Because God, by his Spirit, is able to deliver us from those things, to keep us from being those things. If I were to ask you this morning, how many of you have had an experience within the last month where love of self became a real issue in dealing with a person that you were standing across from? How many of you would say, don't raise your hands now, just ask yourself, how many of you would say, yeah, within the last month, that's been an issue that I've had to face? A choice between love of self and loving this person across from me, yielding myself. How many of us would say, yeah, love of pleasure has been something that I've had to come face to face with in a choice that I've made recently? Am I going to pursue something that is pleasurable to me, even though I might know that it is not right before God, or it's going to hurt someone? Love of pleasure. You go down this list, and you think to yourself, well, really what's being described is things that in varying degrees, depending on who each individual is, affect all of us. And the call that Paul gives to Timothy is to avoid such men. And that means for us, that the call is for us not to be this person. My regular prayer is that in my home, in my family, I am able to be a selfless man, that in walking in the footsteps of Christ, walking in the footsteps of Jesus, is able to lay down his life for the good of others. Willing to deny himself, take up his cross, and lay down his life for the good of others. This call to us today to say, okay, there's going to be a day when things are going to head this direction. But this is antithetical to everything that God has called us to be as believers. I'm not going to participate in the apostasy of a day if it comes in my day. But Lord, may the power of your Spirit keep me faithful, keep me strong, and use my life as a testimony and a witness in that day. I'd like to ask you to bow with me. And if you would, for a moment, just putting your own heart before God, maybe doing two things. One would be a moment of evaluation. It says something like, what do my relationships with people and my relationship with God, what does it tell me about how I'm doing? Do I find delight in the things of God? Do I find pleasure in the things of God? And if not, is it because I have found pleasure in things that have deadened my senses toward the things of God? Maybe if we're really honest, maybe we'd be able to say, and I have a relationship or two in my life where I can see that love of self is kind of strong. The struggle that I'm having here is really one of letting go of what I want in favor of laying down my life for someone else. Maybe we could take a moment to evaluate that. The second one is probably a lot like the first, and that is just to take a moment to say, all right, that's a really ugly list. Lord, is there one or two of those that I need to invite your Holy Spirit to convict me of today? To take a step of repentance? Because I see my tendency there, and I'm going to need God's grace, because I don't want to participate in the apostasy of that day. I don't want to be of that spirit. I would invite you to take a moment to say, Lord, what is it that I need to look at honestly so that I can be within myself, with others, and before you, in relationship with you. I can be sound. give you one moment of reflection this morning before we close in prayer.